In 2013, a study came out that a lot of men have been quietly carrying around ever since. Sabino Cornrich, Julie Brines, and Katrina Leip published it in the American Sociological Review. The finding was that married men who did more traditionally female housework, the cooking and the cleaning and the shopping, reported having less sex than husbands who did less of it. It went everywhere. The interpretation attached to it was simple and flattering to a certain worldview. Be less domesticated. Traditional roles create desire. 3 years later, Daniel Carlson, Amanda Miller, Sharon Sassler, and Sarah Hansen looked at that paper again and noticed something the coverage had skipped. The data was old. It came from the 1980s and from 1992. So they ran the same analysis on couples surveyed in 2006, and the relationship had reversed. In contemporary couples, sharing the routine housework was associated with higher sexual frequency and higher sexual satisfaction for both partners. I want to start here because it tells you what kind of video this is. The most quoted fact in this entire subject is a finding from 40 years ago that stopped being true, and it is still being repeated with total confidence by people who never checked. What follows is what the research actually says about why desire fades in a long marriage. Some of it will be uncomfortable and none of it is a technique. There is a section near the end about what the honest answer looks like, and it is not the one this genre usually gives. The first thing that has to go, the question in the title contains an assumption, and the assumption is wrong often enough that it needs dealing with before anything else. The assumption is that desire is a fixed quantity a person has, which points at a target. And that when it stops pointing at you, it must have found somewhere else to point, or you must have done something to switch it off. That is a model of desire built almost entirely on how it works for people who experience it spontaneously. Meaning it arrives on its own, unprompted, as a sort of background hum, and shows up as thoughts and fantasies, and an urge that precedes any actual situation. In 2000, Rosemary Basson published a different model developed from years of clinical work with women. Her argument was that for many women, particularly past the first year or so of a relationship, desire does not work that way at all. It is responsive. It does not arrive first and produce arousal. It arrives second in response to arousal in a context that already feels good. In that model, a woman can start from what Basson called sexual neutrality. Not wanting sex and not wanting it, willing but not driven. And from that neutral position, given the right context and the right kind of approach, arousal builds and desire follows behind it. Take that seriously and the whole question reshapes itself. If desire is responsive, then it does not go missing. It stops being generated because the conditions that used to generate it are no longer there. And this matters enormously for what happens next in a marriage. A man waiting for his wife to spontaneously want him, the way she seemed to at the beginning, maybe waiting for something that was never going to keep happening, then reading its absence as a verdict on him. Two things to be careful about. Basson's model came primarily from clinical observation rather than controlled experiment, and researchers have questioned how well it describes women without sexual difficulties, and it is not a female model and a male model. Plenty of men experience responsive desire and plenty of women experience spontaneous desire. The pattern is a tendency, not a rule, and treating it as a rule is how people end up feeling broken. There's a break, and almost nobody is looking at it. At the Kinsey Institute, John Bancroft and Eric Jansen developed something called the dual control model, and once you understand it, most popular advice on this subject looks obviously misdirected. The model proposes that sexual response depends on two separate systems working at once. An excitation system which notices everything in the environment that is sexually relevant and signals go, and an inhibition system which notices everything that constitutes a reason not to and signals stop. Arousal is not the accelerator being pressed. It is the accelerator being pressed while the brakes are off. Both conditions have to be met, and people vary enormously in how sensitive each system is. Some people have accelerators that respond to almost anything. Some have brakes so sensitive that a single unresolved argument or an unwashed kitchen is enough to hold everything still. Now think about what almost every piece of advice in this space does. Get in better shape. Buy her something, plan a surprise, be more confident, be less available. Every one of those is an attempt to press the accelerator harder. If the actual problem is a brake that is fully engaged, pressing the accelerator harder does nothing. The car does not move. It just burns fuel and makes noise. And if you keep doing it while she is telling you the handbrake is on, the noise itself becomes one more thing on the brake, which reframes the practical question. Not what would turn her on. What is currently turning her off? And how much of it is invisible to me, because it is not happening in the bedroom? The load nobody sees. Here is the most common answer to that question, and it has nothing to do with attraction. There is a difference between doing tasks and holding the system that generates the tasks. One person can wash up when asked, drive the children when told, buy what is on the list. Another person is the one keeping the list, noticing the milk is low, remembering the form is due Thursday, tracking whose birthday is coming, holding the shape of the household in their head continuously. That second job does not stop. It runs in the background at all times, and unlike the dishes, it cannot be seen from across the room, which means it is very rarely thanked and very often invisible even to the person benefiting from it. Read that against the dual control model and the problem becomes obvious. A mind that never gets to put down the running list of everything that needs handling is a mind with the brakes permanently lightly applied. Not because of any conscious decision, because attention that is continuously allocated to management is attention that is not available for anything else. And this is where the Carlson findings from the opening land properly. The reason sharing the routine domestic work was associated with better sexual outcomes in the 2006 data is probably not that doing dishes is attractive. It is that a partner who genuinely shares the load is a partner who takes weight off the brake, and a partner who has to be asked, managed, and thanked is one more item on the list. There is a version of helping that makes this worse rather than better. If every task still has to be noticed by her, assigned by her, and checked by her, then you have not taken the load. You have added a supervision job to it. The relief comes from ownership, from things being handled without her having to hold them, and the difference between those two is the entire difference. The paradox at the center of long relationships. There is an idea from the therapist Esther Perel that is worth putting in here with a clear label on it. Her argument, developed across years of clinical work rather than through controlled studies, is that love and desire run on requirements that partly conflict. Love wants closeness, safety, predictability, knowing everything about the other person. Desire tends to want distance, novelty, mystery, a certain amount of not knowing. And the closeness that a good long marriage produces so successfully is, by that account, sometimes the very thing that flattens the erotic charge. I'm flagging this as clinical theory rather than experimental finding because that is what it is. It has been enormously influential, and it has not been established the way the Bassin or dual control work has. But there is a version of it that is useful without needing to be proven, and it is about how people stop seeing each other. When you have watched someone deal with a stomach bug and a tax return and a bad haircut, when you know exactly what they will say next, the person can become fully known. And fully known can shade into slightly invisible. They stop being someone you're looking at. They become part of the furniture of your life, which is a wonderful thing for security and a difficult thing for desire. Notice that this cuts both ways. It is not that she stopped seeing you as a man. It is that both of you stopped being watched, and only one of you is currently upset about it. The reasons that have nothing to do with you at all. This section is the one most likely to be skipped by videos on this topic, and it may be the most important one. A significant proportion of the time, a drop in desire is not relational at all. It is medical, hormonal, pharmacological, or psychiatric, and the marriage is simply the place where it becomes noticeable. Antidepressants, particularly the SSRI class, very commonly reduce sexual desire and impair arousal and orgasm. This is one of the best documented side effects in psychiatry. Hormonal contraception affects desire in some women. Thyroid disorders do. Chronic pain conditions do. Anemia does. Depression itself, quite apart from its treatment, reduces desire substantially, and is easy to miss when it presents as exhaustion and irritability rather than sadness. Then there are the transitions. The postpartum period involves sleep deprivation, hormonal upheaval, and a body recovering from a major physical event. It also involves being touched constantly all day by a small person, which for many women produces a genuine aversion to being touched again at the end of it. That is not rejection. It is a nervous system that has had enough input. Perimenopause, which can begin years before anyone expects it, changes hormone levels in ways that affect desire, comfort during sex, and arousal directly. And there's sexual pain, which is more common than most men realize and which women frequently do not report, sometimes for years. If sex has become physically uncomfortable, the brain does exactly what it should do and starts generating avoidance. From the outside, that looks identical to lost attraction. It is not. If any of this might be in play, the useful next step is a doctor, not a strategy. And the fact that a man reading this list feels relief rather than defensiveness is itself worth noticing because it tells you the fear underneath the question was never really about sex. The cycle that makes everything worse. Now the part where a real relational mechanism does show up. And it is usually not the one people are looking for. Somebody notices the frequency has dropped, they raise it, or they do not raise it, but they become tense about it. The other person now knows that every ordinary moment of affection is being read as a possible beginning. So they start withholding the ordinary affection, not out of coldness, but to avoid starting something they will then have to stop. The first person experiences the withdrawal of casual touch as further evidence of the problem, and increases the pressure. The second person increases the distance, and within a few months, a couple who had a frequency difference now has a situation where they cannot hug in the kitchen. This is the pursuit and withdrawal pattern, and it is one of the most reliably observed dynamics in couples research. What makes it cruel is that both people are behaving reasonably given what they perceive, and the pattern still deteriorates. Two things about it are worth knowing. Firstly, pressure is a break. Something experienced as an obligation cannot easily also be experienced as a desire, and every added increment of expectation makes responsive desire less likely to emerge, not more. Secondly, the withdrawal of non-sexual affection is often the single most damaging move in the whole sequence, and it is usually made for understandable reasons by the lower desire partner, which suggests something counterintuitive and difficult. The route out often starts with deliberately separating affection from sex, so that touch stops being a negotiation. That is hard to do sincerely when you want the other thing, and doing it as a maneuver does not work, because people can tell desire difference is the normal condition. One more piece of context, because it changes how much of this is even a problem. Desire discrepancy, meaning one partner wanting sex more often than the other, is close to universal in long relationships. It is one of the most common presenting issues in couples therapy, and it is not a sign of a failing marriage. Two people with independently varying levels of interest will almost never match, and the odds of them matching continuously across decades, through illness and children and stress and aging, are effectively zero. What distinguishes couples who do well is not that they have no discrepancy. It is how they treat it. Where it is understood as a difference to be negotiated with goodwill, it stays manageable. Where it becomes evidence about someone's worth, either his desirability or her adequacy, it becomes a wound that gets reopened every time the subject arises. And that reframing matters for the question in the title, because the phrase lost desire for you carries an accusation inside it. It says the desire existed, it was aimed at you, and its disappearance is a judgment. Most of the time, the more accurate sentence is far less dramatic. The conditions changed, the type of desire changed, the load increased, the context stopped working, and nobody noticed because it happened over years. What the honest answer looks like, so what actually helps. The first thing is the least satisfying, which is that you cannot solve this on your own, and you should stop trying to. Every version of this that involves you privately implementing a strategy on your wife will fail, because the thing that needs to change is a shared context and you only control half of it. It also frankly will not survive contact with her noticing. People know when they are being handled. The second thing is to have the conversation outside the moment, not after a rejection, not in bed, not at the end of an evening where you had been hoping. The subject cannot be discussed honestly while one person's answer is going to determine what happens in the next 10 minutes. The third thing is to change the question you're asking, not why do you not want me? That question demands a defense, and the honest answer is often I do not know, which sounds like a lie and is not one. A more useful question is what would have to be different for you to have any interest at all, which asks about conditions rather than feelings and is answerable. The fourth thing is to take the medical possibilities seriously and say so out loud. Telling your wife you would like her to see a doctor because you are concerned about her, and meaning it is a completely different act from telling her the same thing because you want more sex. She will know which one it is. The fifth thing is the load. Take a piece of it permanently and completely. Not help with it, own it, including the noticing and the remembering, so that it leaves her head entirely. That is the single most concrete thing available, and it is the one the research most directly supports. And the sixth thing is that a sex therapist is a real profession, and this is precisely what they do. There is a version of this problem that couples solve themselves and a version that they circle for a decade, and the difference is often just whether anybody was willing to make the appointment. What this video will not do. I want to end on the thing this genre gets wrong, because it is the reason most of the advice on this subject is worse than useless. Almost every video with this title is selling the same underlying promise, that there is a set of behaviors which, correctly performed, will restore your wife's desire. Be more masculine, be less available, lift more, lead more, withdraw attention, create scarcity. The promise is control, and the appeal is obvious. Because the position of not being wanted by someone you love is frightening and helpless, and anything offering a lever out of it will find buyers. But desire is not a lock that opens for the right key, and treating another person as a system to be operated is itself corrosive to the exact thing you're trying to restore. A woman can feel the difference between a husband who has genuinely taken half the weight of their life and one who is performing a routine he found online while watching for results. The second one produces more distance, not less, and the distance is deserved. The real answer is slower and less flattering. Desire in a long relationship is not maintained by tactics. It is a byproduct of conditions, and the conditions are built out of ordinary things: rest, fairness, being genuinely known and still looked at, the absence of pressure. A body that is not in pain, and a mind that is not carrying the whole household alone. None of that fits on a thumbnail. It also happens to be what the evidence supports. And if you have watched this far, one last thing. The fear underneath this question is almost never really about frequency. It is about whether you're still wanted, and whether the person who chose you would choose you again. That is a reasonable thing to be frightened of and a terrible thing to carry silently for years. Say it out loud to her. Not as an accusation, and not as a request. Just the fear itself. That is the cue most people miss. If this describes something you recognize, you are in enormous company, and it is worth saying so in the comments where somebody else will see it. Subscribe to Psychology Q, and I will keep showing you the signals hiding in plain sight.